Human prehistory is not some glorious, cinematic saga of brave, muscle-bound warriors valiantly conquering the untamed wilderness. It is, quite frankly, a desperate, rolling comedy of errors where a bunch of terrified, underqualified hominins realized that literally everything else on the planet was bigger, faster, and actively trying to unalive them on a daily basis. Now, grab your crudely sharpened rocks, look out for giant predators, and let's open the prehistoric case file. Let us travel back to a little crime scene we like to call Schöningen, Germany, roughly 300,000 years ago. The Pleistocene epoch was essentially nature's version of a toxic startup culture, and early humans were the unpaid interns just trying not to get fired, which, in this economy, meant being violently trampled to death by your betters. Pop culture loves to sell us this ridiculous myth of the alpha caveman, an absolute unit standing toe-to-toe with a snarling beast, heroically swinging a massive wooden club like he is auditioning for a superhero franchise. We need to actively mock this completely fabricated nonsense right now. If a prehistoric human ever actually attempted a fair, honorable one-on-one melee fight with Pleistocene megafauna, they did not make it into the fossil record as a conqueror. They made it into the fossil record as a thin smear of calcium scattered across a grassy plain. When we look at the crime scene data at Schöningen, we realize that our ancestors were profoundly aware of their own embarrassing physical inadequacy. The victims in this specific prehistoric homicide case were wild horses. Now, do not picture the majestic, sugar cube-eating ponies of today. We are talking about prehistoric wild horses, hyper-aggressive, heavily muscled battering rams with a terrible attitude and hooves that could shatter a hominin ribcage like cheap porcelain. Approaching one of these animals with a handheld rock to demand a hostile takeover of its caloric assets was a mathematically guaranteed death sentence. So, how did a group of physically inferior primates secure the bag without securing a one-way ticket to the afterlife? They invented the prehistoric equivalent of a drive-by shooting. They looked at the very concept of close-quarters combat, collectively said absolutely not, and decided to outsource the violence to a sharpened piece of wood. This was the birth of the projectile weapon. It was not born out of a noble desire to advance technology or conquer nature. It was born out of sheer, unadulterated panic. They realized that if you take a stick, whittle it down, and chuck it really hard from a cowardly distance, you can potentially ruin a horse's day without ever having to look it in the eye. It is the ultimate manifestation of the idea that teamwork makes the dream work, especially when the entire team is simply too terrified to get within 20 feet of the objective. Imagine the sheer tension of this prehistoric side hustle. You have a squad of panicking hominins, probably sweating profusely, crammed together behind a single, tragically inadequate Pleistocene shrub. They are communicating strictly through frantic eye movements and silent hyperventilating, holding onto these crooked sticks like their lives depend on it, because they literally do. The strategy is not a highly coordinated military flanking maneuver. The strategy is to wait until the horse is looking the other way, simultaneously hurl their wooden javelins out of pure, shivering desperation, and then immediately prepare to sprint in the opposite direction if they miss. This was early human innovation at its absolute finest, maximizing physical distance to minimize personal accountability in a deadly altercation. They were not brave apex predators staking their claim. They were opportunistic lurkers trying to cheat the food chain with a pelt-and-run tactic, hoping against hope that the sheer volume of airborne wood would compensate for their absolute refusal to fight fair. To fully appreciate the sheer absurdity of this prehistoric drive-by, we have to look closely at the murder weapons themselves. Deep in a German coal mine, perfectly preserved in waterlogged mud, which is essentially nature's sloppy Tupperware, archaeologists found the Schöningen spears. These are not just random twigs snapped off a bush in a moment of frantic improvisation. These are 9 meticulously crafted, 2-meter-long spruce weapons dating back 300 millennia. Getting a group of easily distracted hominins to sit down and carve spruce logs with terrible, jagged rocks is the ultimate prehistoric unpaid internship. The amount of labor required to manufacture just one of these things is staggering. Imagine spending 72 consecutive hours grinding a thick piece of wood with a dull piece of flint that constantly cuts your hands, knowing full well that your only reward for this artisanal craftsmanship is the opportunity to go throw it at a biological bulldozer that actively hates you. The truly wild part is the engineering. When we analyze the physical specs of these weapons, we find that the thickest and heaviest part of the spear is strictly located in the front third of the shaft. This is the exact same center of gravity used in modern Olympic javelins. Now, do not give our ancestors too much credit here. They were not sitting in a cave scratching advanced algebraic equations for aerodynamic drag onto the limestone walls. They discovered aerodynamics through the deeply motivational power of absolute terror. The research and development process was strictly trial and error. And in the Pleistocene era, an error meant your R&D director was violently stomped into a fine paste by a very annoyed herbivore. They quickly realized that if you throw a balanced, uniform stick, it tends to flutter helplessly in the wind before bouncing harmlessly off the target's thick hide, instantly alerting the beast to your cowardly presence. But if you make the front end heavier, the spear acts like a heat-seeking missile of desperation. It arcs beautifully, points straight down, and utilizes gravity to drive the sharpened tip through thick muscle and bone. This is the hominin equivalent of relying on aim assist because your natural hand-eye coordination is fundamentally garbage. Crafting these 300,000-year-old wooden javelins became the ultimate survival hack. It was an entire technological revolution born entirely from the collective desire to avoid a fair physical altercation at all costs. Let us visualize the clunky execution of this pelt-and-run strategy. You and your co-workers have finally finished your bespoke, aerodynamic spruce javelins. You are exhausted, you have splinters the size of your thumb, and your workplace morale is at an all-time low. Now comes the worst part of the gig economy, the delivery phase. The squad creeps through the tall grass, experiencing a level of psychological stress that would instantly liquefy a modern human's adrenal glands. Every snapped twig sounds like a gunshot. Every shift in the wind threatens to broadcast your unwashed hominin scent directly into the nostrils of a highly aggressive, 600-pound wild horse that is just trying to enjoy its lunch. This is not a stealth mission executed by elite military operatives. This is a group of terrified roommates creeping up on a sleeping landlord to deliver a hostile eviction notice via high-velocity lumber. They get within striking distance, which, given their pathetic throwing arms, is uncomfortably close. The tension is mathematically unbearable. If you throw too early, the spear loses momentum and you merely annoy the beast. If you get too close, the horse spots you, and you are instantly promoted from predator to a trampled floor mat. Then comes the synchronized attack. There is no majestic battle cry. A battle cry would be idiotic and suicidal. Instead, there is likely a frantic, panicked grunt serving as the signal to unleash the barrage. They all stand up from behind their miserable little bush and chuck their painstakingly crafted sticks with every ounce of pathetic hominin strength they possess. But here is the critical part of the plan that nature documentaries always conveniently leave out: the immediate aftermath. In a modern video game, when you hit an enemy with a projectile, they immediately drop their loot. In the Pleistocene, when you hit a wild horse with a sharpened stick, it does not politely fall over and offer you its tenderloins. It shrieks, rears up, and experiences a massive surge of adrenaline and profound rage. The execution of the prehistoric drive-by shooting relies heavily on the drive-by component. The very microsecond those spears leave their hands, the hominins are not standing around admiring their aerodynamic handiwork. They are instantly pivoting and breaking the land speed record in the opposite direction. The strategy is to pelt the target, sprint away like absolute cowards, hide in a tree or a ditch, and simply wait for the horse to slowly succumb to blood loss over the next few hours. They essentially outsource the actual killing blow to time and infection. It is an incredibly dishonorable way to hunt, completely devoid of glory, but it is precisely this brand of highly orchestrated, heavily armed cowardice that kept our ancestors from going completely extinct in a world that desperately wanted to erase them. Fast forward a few agonizing hours. The horse has finally expired from its unscheduled, high-velocity acupuncture session, and the hominins cautiously descend from whatever miserable trees they were hiding in. The crime scene forensics here are absolutely undeniable. We know exactly how this gruesome aftermath played out because of taphonomy. Taphonomy is the archaeological study of how organic remains decay and become fossilized. It is essentially nature's extremely petty collection of post-mortem receipts, tracking exactly who did what to a carcass. When investigators analyze these specific Schoningen horse bones under a microscope, they do not find the clean, methodical slices of a confident apex predator. They find frantic, overlapping, V-shaped gouges left by jagged stone tools. These chaotic cut marks prove that our ancestors were aggressively speedrunning the meat extraction process. They were slicing, hacking, and sawing with the desperate, sweaty energy of someone trying to strip copper wire from a condemned building before the authorities show up. And why were they rushing so intensely? Because in the Pleistocene, humans were absolutely not at the top of the corporate ladder. They were desperately trying to avoid the actual management class, specifically Pachycrocuta. This was the giant, short-faced hyena, a roaming biological nightmare the size of a modern lion, possessing jaw strength that could casually snap a megafauna femur like a stale breadstick. We know these monsters were constantly lurking in the background because archaeologists keep finding their coprolites, which is just a highly prestigious, peer-reviewed scientific term for ancient, fossilized predator poop scattered around early human sites. Our ancestors were acutely aware that the smell of a freshly butchered horse was basically a massive, unblockable push notification alerting every giant carnivore in a 5-mile radius that a free pop-up buffet had just opened. Therefore, securing the kill was only half the battle. The rest was the ultimate scavenger hustle. There was no time for a leisurely, victorious, prehistoric barbecue to celebrate their aerodynamic engineering brilliance. This was a strict smash-and-grab gig economy operation. The strategy was to violently hack off the highest-calorie premium cuts, pack the meat into whatever makeshift bindles they had, and absolutely sprint back to whatever drafty, uninsulated co-living cave space they were currently squatting in. They had to evacuate the premises before the real landlords of the Ice Age arrived to forcefully collect the tax. It is a profound historical irony. They managed to invent a revolutionary ballistic weapon, successfully execute a long-range assassination against a massive beast, and yet they still had to eat their dinner in the dark while suffering from collective, rolling panic attacks. When you sit in your secure, climate-controlled apartment today, effortlessly ordering overpriced takeout from a glowing rectangle, take a moment to respect the true nature of your lineage. We are not the descendants of fearless, honorable titans who bravely conquered the untamed earth. We are simply the extremely lucky genetic byproduct of heavily armed cowards who mastered the art of throwing sharp sticks and running for their absolute lives.